Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, which is one of over 200 events taking place during this year's Careers Week. My name's Graham Smith. I'm the interim chair of the Career Services Collaborative. In a moment, we'll hear from Dr. Pat Watt and Debbie Pavia from the SDS Research and Evaluation team about the research the team has undertaken to help us understand young people and their career ambitions. First, a particular welcome from me to Helen Dunnypace, who's providing British Sign Language interpretation for the event today. Welcome, Helen. Before we hear from Pat and Debbie, just a couple of things to mention with regard to our agenda this afternoon. First of all, the event's been recorded. That recording will be available following today's event. At the moment, your cameras and your audio has been disabled, but that will be enabled later on in the event to let you join in the conversation. So don't worry about that. Because we're tight from time, I'd be grateful if you would pose any questions you have in relation to the presentation in the chat function. Colleagues from SDS Research and Evaluation team will try and answer them as we go, but any questions that can't be answered this way will either be picked up verbally after the presentations if we've got time, and if we haven't, they'll be addressed in the follow-up pack, which will be sent to you after the event. The pack will also include the presentation slides, so that might prevent you having to quickly write down everything you see on the slides. You will get a copy of these presentation slides. In the second part of the event, there will be an opportunity for you to provide feedback on how services and those working directly with young people can use the insights that we are about to hear about, what else we can get from this research and indeed what the future research agenda might be around careers. We'll be using Menti. We'll provide the details of how to access it then, including noting the details, the access details in the chat function. Those familiar with using Menti will know that you'll need either to have another internet-enabled device to hand, or you can open another page on your browser or your laptop in order to access the Menti session. I'm particularly pleased to be hosting the event this afternoon on behalf of the Career Services Collaborative, because today's event is a perfect fit with the concept and operating principles we envisaged for the collaborative when we recommended it as a mechanism for taking forward the approach adopted during the career review, the programme board of which I had the pleasure of chairing for the last couple of years. To my mind, it's a perfect fit in three key ways. The collaborative, amongst other things, is a mechanism to, I suppose as it says on the tin, drive effective collaboration amongst the partners in what the career review described as the careers ecosystem, which covers careers information, advice and guidance, careers education and brokerage. And I know we have participation this afternoon from all of these areas. So I suppose this gathering is the collaborative in action and the sort of event that gives the collaborative an identity. One of the areas that collaboration has the potential to be really impactful is in the sharing of knowledge and insights to ensure improvement in the services available to the citizens of Scotland, and to ensure that these services are firmly grounded in up-to-date evidence, which of course is what we are about to hear from in a moment from our SDS colleagues. And third, and probably to my mind most important, the focus today is on the voice of the user of career services, and that was at the heart of the career review and must be at the heart, in my view, of the approach that the collaborative takes going forward, and how we drive career services that are co-designed involving the users along with practitioners now and in the future. So as I say, I'm delighted to be hosting the event on behalf of the collaborative, and it gives me a great pleasure now to hand over to give him his full title, Dr. Patrick Watt, Head of Evaluation and Research at Skills Development Scotland, who will outline the wide range of research that the SDS Evaluation and Research team does to support career services, before Pat hands then on to Debbie Pavia, a research manager at SDS, who will take us through some of the detailed insights from the team's work with young people. So over to you, Pat.
Graham, thanks very much, and thanks everyone for taking the time to come along to the webinar. If we go on to the first slide, Debbie, please. So I'll talk about CIAG, which is Careers Information Advice and Guidance. So we recognise that CIAG service is an all-age service. The focus today obviously is on our research with young people, but we work very closely with some of our colleagues in CIAG, so Patricia Thompson, Jude Kavanagh and Hannah Cuthbertson, and they help shape our research to make it useful for our CIAG colleagues. So it would be remiss of me not to mention some of the other research that we do. So that includes research with head teachers, getting consistent feedback from all the CIAG delivery and access centres, secondary schools in Scotland, parents and carers, key stakeholders and CIAG partners. I'll say a little bit more as well about our PhD programme. So we deliver a sponsored PhD programme in partnership with the Scottish Graduate School of Social Sciences. It's been described by the Economic and Social Research Council as a demonstrator model of collaborative good practice. We have a number of students in there who are looking at topics related to CIAG. So that will be things like career information literacy and decision-making behaviours of young people, natural language interfaces to support career decision-making of young people, how you enhance an all-age career service, the role of CIAG in addressing poverty and socioeconomic disadvantage. So I think there's things in there that are having that academic link is really helpful as well in our research work. But the focus today is on our research with young people. We have three big pieces of work that we do. They are Young People in Scotland, Pupils' Voice and YPCA. So Young People in Scotland is an omnibus survey, so it's conducted by Ipsos Scotland, and we essentially purchase or buy some questions in that survey. We then undertake the analysis of that data when it comes back to us. It covers S1 to S6 pupils, so from the ages of about 11 to 17. Covers over 1,500 respondents, and the topics include key career influencers, plans after school, preferred job sectors, desirable job attributes, and it has a strong equalities focus. If we move on one, thank you. We also have the senior phase, that's S4 to S6, that's about 16 to 18 maybe. That's undertaken entirely by ourselves in SDS Evaluation and Research. It covers S4 to S6 pupils, as I said. We got 8,700, so close to 9,000 respondents, so it's a really rich data set. It covers the CIAG support received, outcomes and benefits, satisfaction, likelihood to recommend the service to others, and identifying areas for improvement. And finally, the third part of our research with young people is post-school. Thank you, Debbie. This is undertaken by the SDS Evaluation and Research team. It covers recent school leavers, about a year after they've left school. We had about 1,400 respondents the last time we undertook this. It covers things like planned destination, what you plan to do when you left school, what you actually did when you left school, what you're doing now a year after you've left school, who influenced you, what were the barriers, what are your aspirations, what are your levels of satisfaction with your current status. So these are really rich data sets, and what Debbie's going to do now is try and produce a narrative of the research across these three core pieces of work. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Debbie.
Thank you, Pat. Okay, so as Pat mentioned, what we've done is there's a kind of thread that runs through our research. So we look at the way we've kind of structured the presentation today is not to take you through each piece of the research in turn. We'll take you through the kind of narrative that runs through the projects from starting from S1 and going to senior phase and then going post-school. As Pat mentioned, we work really closely with our CIAG colleagues to design, shape the research, and we also share and disseminate the research with our colleagues. So we've picked these kind of 5 themes we've got here today based on feedback from CIAG colleagues about what information, insight they need, and also around where's an interesting story in here in the research that we've undertaken. So there's 5 key areas. The first area is around the gendered nature of subject and sector choice and how this plays out from S1 through to senior phase and then into post-school. Key influencers, so the people and the factors that influence young people's career decisions and pathways. expectations about the world of work. So what are young people's expectations about the world of work, and how do these align with employers? Apprenticeships, so young people's perceptions, views and awareness of apprenticeships, and then barriers, pathways and transitions. So we will describe what this looks like for young people and how it's influenced by deprivation. So we've used the Scottish Government's Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation as a proxy for least deprived and most deprived. So we know it's not a perfect measure of deprivation, but just to kind of caveat that that's the definition that we've used throughout our presentation. So this section is going to look at the gendered nature of subject and sexual choice. It's important to understand subject choice, as it's got an important impact on future educational and career opportunities available to both boys and girls, and it's also associated with gender segregation in the labour market. This research comes from our Young People in Scotland research, so it's S1 to S6 pupils. So we asked them what influences their subject choices. So what we find is that young people tend to base their subject choices based on their interests and strengths and what they think would be most useful for their future career. There are differences in gender here, so boys are more likely to choose subject based on their interests and strengths, whereas females are more likely to choose subjects based on college or university course requirements. Not on this slide, but this also aligns with further insights from our Young People in Scotland research, which tells us that girls are more likely to plan to go to university and college than boys. So we also asked school pupils what job sector they wanted to go into when they leave school. So again, this is our young people in S1 to S6. And what we find is that the sectors that young people want to go into vary considerably by gender. So girls want to go into caring roles such as medicine and health, teaching and childcare, creative industries, whereas boys are interested in getting into sport, engineering, science, technology and STEM type subjects. So we've looked at the kind of broader literature out there, and there is some research called Drawing the Future, which looks at 7 to 11-year-olds in primary school. And again, it's similar patterns when we ask them to draw what they see themselves as being in their future career. So this kind of highlights the importance of early intervention. Those stereotypes start to develop at a very young age. And this remains the case when pupils leave school. So when we look at the post-school, 1 year post-school, it's a similar pattern. There's very gendered ideas about what young women want to do when they leave school and what young men want to do. So it's similar patterns that play out from S1 to S6 into post-school. We also asked young people whether they agreed or disagreed with a range of statements about STEM and caring careers. So again, this was our S1 to S6 pupils, and we've presented the results here by gender as well. So what we find is that boys express more interest in STEM-related jobs and careers, while higher proportions of girls think that STEM-related jobs and careers aren't suited to them. So we think the gender imbalance in the STEM sector can be partly linked to subject choices made in school, and that's kind of key to addressing future demand for STEM occupations. We also asked the same questions about caring careers, and we find conversely that boys are more likely to say that a career in caring is not suited to them, and girls are more interested in a career in caring. And they also are more likely to view it as rewarding or feel that there's a wide range of opportunities in the sector. So we also asked young people about their salary expectations, and what you can see here in the purple is young women, and orange is young men. The average salary based on ONS data is 33,000 in the UK. So expectations are roughly in line with reality. But what you can see is that above that kind of average salary of 33,000, men tend to kind of aim for salaries in the higher range of that average. Whereas if you look below, you can see it's the purple's the bigger line there. So women are aiming for kind of the lower range of that average salary. Now moving on to key influencers. So by understanding and considering the various influencers of career decisions, we can create a supportive environment that encourages young people to pursue the career pathway that's right for them. We can also target our communication and our messaging and information at those with the most influence. So we asked young people who influences their career decisions, and we asked about a range of different people that might influence them. This was our post-school students. This is 1 year post-school. And again, we've broken it down by deprivation. So on the left is SIMD1, which is the most deprived, and on the right is SIM2, SIMD5, which is the least deprived. So what we can see here is that parents and carers are the biggest influencers. We find this in all the research we do. We also find it in our Young People in Scotland research as well, with the younger age groups, that parents are the biggest influencers. But the difference here by deprivation is that you can see that careers advisors tend to have more of an influence in those from this particular group. We also ask young people who they receive information about apprenticeships from, who and where they receive information about apprenticeships from. And again, parents are up there at the top, along with teachers. And a quarter of young people haven't received any information about apprenticeships. So we also asked parents about the extent to which they feel they influence their child's choices about career and learning options. So what we find is that parents aren't particularly confident. We asked them to scale on a scale of 1 to 10, to what extent did they feel they influence, 1 being no influence, 10 being a great influence. So they're not confident. As you can see, the average score is 5.9 out of 10. And it kind of sits around that 5, 6, 7 score. Only 20% scored this between 8 and 10. So limited numbers think they're very influential. So there is a kind of mismatch around what young people say are their influencers and how parents feel about that. We also asked young people about, other than the people that influence them, what are the factors that influence them as well. So we gave them a range of choices to find out, what are the kind of biggest drivers. So what we find is that the need to earn money, interest in hobbies and qualifications are the most common influencers. But we find again, on the left there, that's the most deprived. There are differences between the most and the least deprived. So those from the most deprived areas are concerned with earning money, whereas those from the least deprived areas are thinking about the qualifications that they need for when they leave school. And we'll come on to this later, but this kind of aligns with the finding that those from the least deprived areas tend to plan to go to university more than those from the most deprived areas. So we also So it's important to understand young people's expectations of the world of work so that employers know how to shape the workplace in order to attract skills and talent. And it's also important to understand what employers need so that young people can be supported to develop these skills and attributes. So we asked our young people in S1 to S6, what do you want from a job? What are the kind of key things that you're looking for? So what you can see here is that they're looking for a range of things for a job, but it's predominantly good pay and job satisfaction. Good pay is the kind of scoring in there's concentrated in good pay. But when you ask the same question of pupils when they're at the 1 year post-school stage, this broadens out. So they're thinking much more beyond pay. They're thinking about helping others. They're thinking about work-life balance, variety and interest in the job, learning new skills. So these are kind of principles that are aligned with those in the Fair Work agenda. We also ask young people what they think employers want from an employee. Again, we ask this the pupils in school S1 to S6. So young people report things like being hardworking, having the right qualifications. So again, the kind of responses are quite concentrated in those two things. We ask again post-school, 1 year post-school, and again this kind of broadens out. So young people are thinking about more kind of meta type skills like communication skills, reliability, confidence, having a positive attitude and good communication skills. You can see that kind of maturity and development of awareness of the world of work as they move through the school years. So we also thought it would be interesting to map what employers are looking for against what young people think employers are looking for and how they look at how these align. So we've used employer skills survey for this just to kind of caveat that this is what employers want generally rather than specifically from young people. We can see there's a wee bit of alignment in there. So employers are looking for young people that can manage their own time, good team working skills, and that's kind of coming up on the young people side as well. So there is some alignment, but there is still scope to improve that. There is a wee bit of kind of disconnect there between the two. So that suggests there's kind of scope to improve that further. It's also important to understand perceptions and awareness of apprenticeships for the following reasons, so that we can tailor direct support via our CIG services appropriately, and it also helps employers align their expectations with the aspirations of apprentices. So we asked young people what they think of apprenticeships. We asked them about their awareness, their understanding, and their views of apprenticeships across a number of kind of elements. This was our S1 to S6 group, so those that are in school. So what we find is that 2/3 like the idea of being able to work while getting a qualification. About half think it's a good way to start their career. Half think it would give them the skills they need to get into university or college. But we also find that about half don't know much about apprenticeships, and about a quarter think they're only available in a small number of jobs and industries. So that would suggest that there is scope to increase awareness, knowledge, understanding of work-based learning amongst young people. So we also, in the senior phase, so this is our senior phase research, we asked them when they're in S4 to S6 about those young people who didn't do an apprentice, what would have encouraged them to do an apprentice, a foundation apprenticeship? So this is quite an interesting question, because it gives you an indication. FAs are the kind of route onto apprenticeship, the kind of first step onto the apprenticeship pathway. So what would encourage them to kind of take that first step? So what we find is that young people want more information about FAs, but they also want that kind of practical experience. They want to hear directly from colleges and universities, from employers and from young people. They want that kind of direct engagement, and that would encourage them to kind of go down that route. So that highlights the value of that approach. But we also find that 25% say that nothing would encourage them to choose an FA. So we'll now move on to describe young people's pathways and transitions in detail, as well as some of the barriers and challenges that they encounter along the way. So we asked young people about the types of barriers they perceive in their future career, and what you can see is that there's lots of different barriers that they perceive. However, key among these is confidence. So young people having enough confidence in themselves, and work experience are the big ones. We look at this broken down by least deprived and most deprived. So on the left is your most deprived, on the right, SIMD is the least deprived. So what we find is those from the least deprived areas, their barriers are having enough work experience or competition in the labour market, whereas those in the most deprived, it's confidence, it's having enough confidence in themselves. So yeah, differences there in terms of barriers that young people from different backgrounds face. If you ask people who are still in school, so your school pupils S1 to S6, what they plan to do when they leave school, most want to go to university. A small proportion want to go to college, and many are unsure. So it's quite dominated by one main pathway at a young age, which is to go to university. We look at these aspirations by deprivation again. So on your left is the most deprived, on the right is the least deprived. So what you can see is some quite big differences in those groups. Young people from the least deprived areas are overwhelmingly planning to go to university and not really considering any other pathway, whereas a greater proportion of those from the most deprived areas are planning to go to college. And there's also a greater proportion of those from the most deprived areas that don't know what they want to do compared to those from the least. So this is important because it demonstrates that young people from different socioeconomic backgrounds might require different levels of support and guidance when thinking about their careers. So we also asked young people at the senior phase, so between S4 and S6, what they plan to do after school. So what we see is that young people's plans kind of broaden out somewhat as they get to the point of leaving school. They're now, rather than university, now much more likely to go to college, although university still is a main plan for a significant proportion. And now young people are starting to think about modern apprenticeships as an option as well. So though young people's plans seem to broaden, they're still mainly considering education and training as the main route. Again, we look at this by deprivation. So on the left is your most deprived, and on the right is the least deprived. Those from the most deprived areas are driving the desire for the college pathways, whereas it's the young people from the least deprived that are driving the desire to enter university. So why is this important and what implications does it have? So we can start to look at this in a bit more detail by mapping out what young people do when they leave school. So this is quite a detailed map. It maps out the career decisions of young people as they transition from school to their current year, to their current path 1 year after they've left school. So you read it from left to right. So on the left-hand section is what young people plan to do when they were in school. And the middle section is what young people initially did when they left school. And the right-hand section is what young people are currently doing now 1 year after leaving school. So the coloured vertical nodes tell us the number of young people choosing that particular destination, and the grey horizontal lines across the page are the frequency and the popularity of that journey from one destination to the next. So as I mentioned in the previous slides, you can see that college and university are the most popular destinations for young people. They're the thickest grey lines, but you can also see that university, which is the purple node, is quite a smooth transition. And most of the people that plan to go to university end up there initially. Most young people also tend to still be at university a year later, which makes sense if they're doing a 3 or 4 year course. But you also see that there are very few people in university that didn't plan to be there. Few grey lines. So if you didn't plan to go to university, it is unlikely that you end up there. It seems to be a planned destination. College, on the other hand, which is the blue node below university, is different. Many young people plan to go to college and they do end up there initially. But there's also a lot of people who end up in college that didn't initially plan to be there. Additionally, a large proportion of young people who initially went to college after school then split off into various other destinations and are now doing something different. This could be because their course finished or because they changed their mind and decided to do something else. So this shows that there's differences in post-school pathways between university and college. University is smooth, college less so. And you can also look across the other paths such as full-time employment and apprenticeships and get really insightful information about what young people's school transitions look like. So our YPC research is a really good kind of source of information on what those pathways look like in detail. So we can also look at this data broken down by levels of deprivation. So the graph on the left-hand side is young people from the most deprived areas in Scotland, and the one on the right is those from the least deprived. So looking at the graphs side by side, you can see that the graph on the left, mostly deprived young people, has got more transitions. It's much more fragmented, it's more messy than the graph on the right, which is the least deprived. So young people from the deprived areas seem to have much more complex post-school transitions than young people from the least deprived areas. And also focusing on the left-hand graph, those from the most deprived areas are much more likely to go through the college pathways as their main destination. And when they're transitioning from their initial destination after leaving school to their current path, which is what they're currently doing now, they seem to be a lot more fragmentation with young people finishing or leaving college and having to decide what to do next. So this is in contrast to the least deprived areas, who are much more likely to begin through the university pathway, and this pathway is much smoother and young people get less fragmented post-school transitions. So again, this demonstrates and highlights that young people from different socioeconomic backgrounds might require different levels of support and guidance, and it also highlights the importance of our career services in targeting young people from the most disadvantaged groups. I think it's important to ensure that young people get the right career management skills to make their way through these different pathways and make career decisions at these important points in their life. So we can also look at the satisfaction levels of young people from the most deprived and the least deprived areas in terms of what they're doing now. So again, on your left, you've got the most deprived, and the right, the least deprived. So looking at the diagram, most people are happy. I mean, it's quite high satisfaction levels. Most people are happy with where they end up. But although satisfaction levels are high, you can see that those from the most deprived areas are less satisfied than those from the least deprived areas. Especially when you look across the different destinations. You can see that modern apprenticeships, university and full-time employment, young people from the deprived areas are consistently less satisfied than those from the least deprived areas. There are exceptions here, like college, which is relatively similar for both groups, and part-time employment, where the most deprived seem to be more satisfied than the least deprived. just to take you on to the summary of our findings. So just to kind of sum up what we've presented. So career choices are very gendered, subject preferences and sexual choices remain gendered. They start from a young age, they persist from S1 through to S6 into senior phase and then leaving school, and this also influences salary expectations as well. Expectations of the world of work. So students in school believe that employers are looking for hardworking individuals with the right qualifications. As they move through school and post-school, they're more likely to highlight kind of meta-focused skills like creativity, innovation, teamwork. So, you know, broader perspective of what the world of work looks like. And also what we find as young people transition to post-school life, their expectations from the world of work evolve. So they start being about pay, but then as they get kind of older and mature, they start to think about fulfillment. They think about well-being, purpose, work-life balance, some of the principles that are in line with Fair Work agenda. What does this mean for employers? So it's important for employers to recognise this shift and create the right environment to attract talent. We also seen that there's scope to improve awareness of apprenticeships. So employers who actively promote and communicate the benefits and practical experiences of work-based learning are likely to be influential and create the potential to attract talent via that pathway. We also see that career pathways, deprivation influence, it's got a strong influence on pathways and transitions, and those from more deprived areas tend to have more barriers around confidence. They've got a much more complex post-school journey, and this emphasises the importance of targeted support and interventions. That's taken us to the end of the research presentations. Just to let you know that our research outputs for all these research studies are available on our publication site, on our corporate site. There's some of the findings we've got briefing papers and infographics that you can access, and Pat briefly mentioned our collaborative PhD programme, so there's a brochure on there that can give you more information about how that works and what's involved as well. So I'll stop presenting and pass you over to Emma.
Can I just, maybe if I can just butt in here a bit? I know we'd asked for colleagues to put any questions they had in the chat. I didn't see any that came up, and if maybe there are some and I've missed them. But we've got I would say maybe 5 minutes or so. If there are any questions very specific to the research, either what Pat said earlier or what Deb, I think more particularly what Debbie said, that anybody wants to ask, then I think we maybe get time to take a few questions if anybody's got them. If you can just use your yellow hand, and I can bring you into the conversation, and then we'll move on to the second part, which as I said earlier, is allowing us to think about whether what this research can help us, and how this research can help us in taking forward the work that we are doing collectively on career services. I'm not forcing anybody to speak if they don't want to, but if anybody does, then now's your opportunity if you want to use your hand.
There's some questions in the chat as well, Graham, if you want us to take them.
Maybe, Pat, if you could, I just see them coming up now. Actually, I couldn't see them earlier on. Is there anything that you wanted to particularly pick up?
So there's a question about the size of the responses, and yeah, that's a good question. So the 1,500 for the young people in Scotland that's the size of Ipsos Mori sample. For the difference between YPC and Pupils Voice that we do ourselves, what we did this year in Pupils Voice was use text messaging as well as email, and we found that's been really successful. So we want to use that in future to get those bigger numbers, because as Debbie says, it allows us to disaggregate the results, which is really helpful. There's a question, are the schools aware of our findings from the research? And yes, so we do publish our research, and through Careers Week we're sharing it more widely with education establishments generally. And I'll be looking at a programme to support the change of gender balance and poverty. Yes, so that'll appear in our PhD programme. We'll also be doing some qualitative research as a team. So the respondents to these pieces of research we asked them for consent to do follow-up research, so we can look at subsets of the group. So we could, for example, we also do work with apprentices, so we could do work with women who have done an engineering apprenticeship, whether they've completed or not, and figured out, you know, what drove them to do that. So they're all really good questions, but yeah, there are things that we're looking into.
There's one there about, did they include deaf students in the research, and do you have data on the responses? There's ones in relation to measures in relation to locations in Scotland. I think there's a second one that's similar. Where were the differences across regions? And this one's specific in terms of awareness of apprenticeships. Is there anything? Is there any information on that, either Debbie or Pat?
So we do ask about disability, and we break the results down by disability. So there's an infographic on there. We do ask the question about specific disability within the questionnaire as well. So we do have that data, but what we would say is that it does get, the sample sizes do become quite small. So yeah, there'd be an issue around how robust the results would be for really specific groups. But we could look at kind of what that looks like and what the numbers are.
And what about regional or locational breakdowns? Can we cut the data in that regard?
I think for some of our research, I think we'd be able to cut it down to regional, especially the kind of senior phase research. So that's our S4 to S6 research. So that's almost 9,000 responses. So I think we've got the potential to break it down there to regional levels, or maybe even local authority level. Yeah, if there's any kind of specific things that people are interested in.
So Debbie's right. So we can break it down to region. It's just sometimes if the numbers get quite small in a region, then your sampling errors become bigger, so it becomes less representative. So we can, in theory, and I think with, as Debbie says, with the pupil's voice, we can actually probably do that in practice because the samples will be quite big. We've also got a question, are the Scottish Government aware of our research? Yes, they are. We've given them the opportunity to include some questions in some of our work, and we have ran a couple of webinars for policy analysts, for analysts and policy people in the government.
Yeah, I think people are keen to see some of the information, if it can be broken down at a council level, I think, a local authority level. But bearing in mind, as Pat said, you know, whether or not the size of the samples makes the outcomes or the insights robust enough to be credible. But you guys will know that better than me when you look at the data. Any other? I think there's a few other things there that you might want to pick up, but maybe if we don't pick up on them at the moment, we can pick up on them either in the discussion late in a moment, or we can answer any questions as they come in the information that's sent out post the event. Is there? And so there's a one there just at the end. How will this data findings be shared more widely? So maybe to say something about how this information is publicised, and whether there are, what's your normal approach, and whether or not there are other things that might be considered to make sure that there's an opportunity to share. There's obviously today's events important in that regard, but any other things that are planned?
Nothing in the pipeline. We've got presentations to the government scheduled, so this is a really good opportunity to kind of share our research more widely. So if anyone wants to invite us in, we're happy to come along.
So as Debbie says, part of it is just making it publicly available, which is what we do on the corporate website, and then webinars like this are really helpful for us. Our comms team, so Emma Diamond and our colleagues, they're really good at taking some of our research and putting it on social media and trying to encourage journalists and the Herald and so on, the print media, to pick up some of the issues. So that point about parents, young people see parents as a key influencer. Lots of parents don't see themselves as an influencer. That disconnect's important, and it's important for how we influence young people's career management skills and career decisions. And again, our comms colleagues are helping us get that message out. And we are happy to come and present to other groups.
Okay, there. So there you are. There's an open invitation to get in touch if you want if you think a presentation would be helpful. Look, colleagues, I mean, there was a lot in that and really useful and interesting information. If you do have questions that occur to you as we continue the event this afternoon, just drop them into the chat. And as I said earlier, we can try and pick them up offline and respond to them as we go. I've got one hand up, and because it's the one hand, the only hand that's been shown, I'm going to, oh, is that hand, that hand's now disappeared. I was going to say, because it was the one hand, I would let that person ask the question, but they've now disappeared, certainly disappeared from my screen. So I think we'll move on to the next part, which is really trying to get your thoughts on how this research might be useful to you in terms of the development of services, whether or not what you have heard this afternoon, I suppose, aligns with what your experience is in dealing with young people, and then maybe a bit about how we can build on this research and what other areas might be of interest. So you'll see, I think you'll see the details there for joining Menti, and then the questions will come up, and you'll be invited to put in some thoughts, and as we go through that, we can maybe get people who have put their thoughts in who maybe want to elaborate on them verbally. We can just call you into the conversation. Maybe while that's all going through the process, and I'm going to put them on the spot here. We've got James Russell, who's the Director of CIAG Operations at SDS, with us this afternoon. So I'm going to put James on the spot a bit. James, this SDS research was undertaken as part of a broader programme of feedback and insight from customers. So it'd be good to, I think, to get an understanding or to understand the approach within SDS to how this type of evidence is used and acted upon to inform your services, and maybe how it might support the service development across the Careers Collaborative and delivering on the careers review recommendations. One of the things which I picked up as we went through this, I was almost ticking them off in terms of the recommendations of the career review and how what we heard this afternoon, whether it be in relation to deprivation, to gender, to fair work, to the attitudes of employers and how they align with the attitudes of young people, how that reflected what we heard during the career review and how that's reflected in the recommendations that we published in the work that's now been taken forward to implement them. But maybe, James, you could say something about how SDS is using this information and the wider research to develop services.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Graham. Great job, Debbie, Pat. So, as you would expect, so Pat told us a bit about the kind of broader evaluation, insight, feedback that we have, and so this is part of a wider programme. But all of that is considered in the context of SDS's broad approach to continuous improvement. So continuous improvement action planning, where we've identified opportunities either to inform services at a national level, to inform our relationships or our stakeholder engagement activity, or whether some of that information that does go down to local authority level or even school level in some instances, what does it tell the practitioner about what their customers are saying? So each and every part of this fundamentally influences the nature of our service delivery at SDS. I noticed there was a question there about parental engagement. So what's really interesting is that the survey's playing out that parents don't really see themselves as influencers, despite the fact that young people identify their parents and carers as one of the most influential people. So how that informs SDS's parental engagement strategy is about what we do with parents, because we're already working with them on a regular basis. So that's about how we build our confidence around having a career conversation. What does a career conversation look like? What might that be made up of? Because it's not a linear trajectory, and actually becomes quite complex when you start getting into that, and if you're not in a kind of practitioner world. So we're really committed to continue to use these. I think it's fair to say when, 5 years ago, it was almost reacting to everything that customers had said. And actually where we are now with the maturity of the programme, it allows us to understand trends, it understands more long-term issues that are being played back from our users, so that we can take either maybe a more strategic or sustainable approach. I think your second point, Graham, probably allows us to kind of look at that as a strategic and sustainable approach, because while SDS as an organisation can do their bit in response to this, and I know some questions there are saying, what is SDS doing? Are they considering a programme in schools? But it's impossible for one service. So every single individual that's committed themselves to come here is committed to hearing what users are saying. And the principles of the collaborative are, how do we respond to this together? So I would really encourage where people are saying, come in and talk to our network or our groups. I've seen some great examples of cross-organisational practitioner networks who are using information and evidence like this to help them work better together in a local setting or in a particular area. So if you're not aware of that, I'm pretty sure you can contact the local SDS team to say, is there a practitioner network here? Or there's nothing stopping people from creating that network. So the fundamental principle of the collaborative is that we all act, plan, deliver and evaluate together, rather than all separately within our own services. And that then allows us, Graham, to, back to your question, respond to the delivery of the recommendations. And I picked up the same areas as you. There's a big focus here around people's ability to be exposed to fair work, all the way through their education and learning approach. So that's embedding it in the curriculum. It's about employers connecting with education. But it's more than just connecting with it. It's about what are they seeing about the world of work. Because pay, yes, is important, but actually having the employee voice, fulfillment in work, feeling valued, being able to develop are really important factors. And actually, as an employer, we look at this ourselves. Do we sell those benefits to people to attract talent? And if we're not, we're actually not going to get it. So the other major area for me, Graham, is around skills in particular. So one of our recommendations was about skills and habits to thrive in a future and uncertain world. So Debbie mentioned career management skills there, about how do you make better decisions or informed decisions during times of uncertainty. And I think we all need a prioritisation and a focus around what skills young people are developing, not just the destinations or the qualifications that they're getting as a result of that. And the more we do that, the more employers do that, the more services focus on it, the more equitable our services become, because each and every one of us has got skills that we can develop in some way, shape or form. Hope that's helpful, Graham.
It was helpful to me, most certainly, yeah, and I hope colleagues found it helpful. I'm seeing in here that colleagues mentioning that they're only seeing the instructions about joining Menti on the screen, and that's what I'm seeing here too. I assumed that we would move on to the questions that we wanted or the issues we wanted you to respond to. Okay, there we are now. So there you go. Maybe if you could type in any thoughts you have about how this insight chimes with your experience and understanding of young people. So was there anything in here that I think probably maybe the focus should be on anything that you thought was maybe not in line with your own experience? I think there wasn't. I think people are saying not many surprises. That was certainly my thought as we went through it. Yeah, I don't think there's any. Is there anyone who's picked up anything that that they thought was a surprise, or maybe they wanted to explore a bit more? I suppose maybe one area, and it wasn't maybe a surprise as such, but I was interested in the research that are the insights that what employers want and what young people want very much aligns by. I wonder whether employers themselves are actually applying that in their recruitment processes. So certainly my experience is there continues to be a real focus on qualifications, and I think as James says earlier, not really on skills, and certainly not on wider attributes and what we've called, I suppose, have been come to be termed meta skills. So certainly I wondered about whether or not employers are actually following through on what they say they're looking for in relation to young people when it actually comes to the recruitment processes. So I think there's nothing much. So very helpful. I mean, I think there's it seems to me that not much that doesn't align with experiences that others have. Maybe we can move on to the next question. So I suppose it's building on what you've heard. Are there other areas that you think would be useful for research to focus on with young people? This is very much this research, of course, was very much on young people, but we have a career service, or career services that are all age. So I suppose there may be some issues in there around how what work might be undertaken for an all age cohort, if I can put it that way. And Pat, maybe, or Debbie, maybe, if you, as you see these issues coming up, if there is what ongoing, are there things that you think are particularly stand out for you about things that might be taken forward? Maybe you could pitch in.
I think there's a really helpful question there about why young people say these things.
Yeah.
So, you know, what we haven't included today is there's open-ended comments in the questionnaire. So we'll look through those and theme them and share them. And also, as I've said, we're keen for particular topics or particular subgroups to do some follow-up research with the young people directly to try and get underneath the kind of numbers and the data here.
I see a couple of people mentioning COVID impact, or certainly one in there. Is there an issue that is there something in there that we need to explore a bit more in a bit more detail about how that experience of COVID may have influenced young people's attitudes?
It's a fair question. So it's something we could include in young people's career ambitions next year when we run it again. We also have, separate to our CIEG work, we have a real-time apprentice insight. So we automatically capture feedback from FAs, foundation apprenticeships, modern apprentices and graduate apprentices when 6 months after they start, 3 months after they leave and 15 months after they leave. And that initial questionnaire has a lot in there about the impact of COVID, which again we'll share shortly.
I'm looking at this as it's going through, and Pat, you'll probably be wishing we hadn't asked this question, because I think so many things that are coming up that I can see people are interested in it, and I'm looking at them and thinking, yeah, that'd be great to understand that. That'd be great to know that. So I think there's loads of stuff that people are suggesting that might be worth further consideration.
Absolutely, this is really helpful to find out what people need to know. As I said at the start, we work with our CIEG colleagues in SDS, and that's driven the research we have already. But some of these questions are really fantastic for us to think about, and then think about how we might address them. Yeah,
I mean, it's really good to get that, and that's something that, as this comes through, I'm sure you will reflect on. I suppose one of the things, I mean, I said earlier on right at the start that I thought this session was a perfect fit with a range of principles and responsibilities that we envisage for the Career Service Collaborative. Obviously, this work was undertaken by your team at SDS. I suppose it would be great to see SDS and other partners utilising the evidence of their customer voice to bring partners together to share that insight to inform future services. So do you think we can go further, Pat, with this? I mean, in terms of, is the art of the possible that we might design and deliver feedback, insight or research for key customer groups together as a group and a collaborative of service providers, where multiple partners use a single piece of research to understand their collective impact? Is there something that we need to explore there in terms of how we collectively take forward some of these questions about future research?
I mean, as a collaborative and having a common evidence base, I think would help. I think other drivers will impact that as well. You know, you don't want to duplicate because, you know, money's tight all round, resources are tight all round. You certainly don't want to overlap, and you certainly don't want to miss big pieces of work that you need to do. I suppose for us, we touched on, you know, we've kind of skirted across the surface of what this research says. So there's more depth in there. So if other collaborative partners want us to look at specific aspects of the research, if the data's in there, then we'll pull it out. And then I think your point's well made, Graham, is if partners want to collaborate next year and how this research could be shaped or amended or adapted, then that's what they're there for. You know, if you can get 8,500 senior phase pupils to tell you something, and you can get hopefully more than 1,500 next year, people who've just left school a year before, those mechanisms and vehicles, we should really capitalise on them, I think.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, maybe this is a conversation that we need to continue post this event about how can we take forward that collective approach, building on what you've done, recognising where the capacity to do that lies. Colleagues, I'm seeing a lot of things coming through here. We're not going to be able to pick up the detail of all of that. We've only got a few minutes left of the event. So I really want to thank everybody for the contributions that they've made. We perhaps having such a tight timescale and using the format we have maybe doesn't allow the kind of interactions that you would get in a bigger event. But I think the real purpose of today was I suppose first and foremost to share that research with you, to get you thinking about you know, whether it aligns with your own experiences, and I think we've heard that it does, to get you thinking about what more needs to be done. And we saw loads of stuff coming through there about what else might be useful, and that's something to reflect on. And then from a collaborative perspective, certainly as far as I'm concerned, there's something to consider about how do we move forward on this collectively to ensure that we get that you know, that opportunity across the range of career service providers to tap into the insights that are there in that wider and in that wider user community, and get that wider user voice to influence service delivery. So I suppose in terms of what the next steps are, you heard earlier on Pat and Debbie saying they were open to people coming to ask them to present further. I don't know if there's anything, Pat or Debbie, you want to say about the next steps in terms of where your plans are in relation to research and evaluation in this space. But I'm sure they're in hand. And as I mentioned earlier, certainly from a collaborative point of view, I'll certainly try and ensure that we get that conversation about how do we bring partners together more effectively around the research and evaluation space, and gather that insight that might be helpful across the whole range of career services. Pat, was there anything you wanted to say, just by way of a conclusion?
No, sorry, Kim, just to say that we do have plans to you know, repeat this kind of young people's research next year, and if the collaborative are interested in helping shape and influence that, we'd be open to that too. Right.
We'll find a mechanism to have that conversation. Colleagues, we're right on time. I'm absolutely delighted that so many of you joined, that so many of you have stayed the course. I know there was one or two wee technical problems that people have. They certainly posted that in the chat, and hopefully you managed to resolve them. As we said earlier, we're going to put out a pack following today's event. There is a recording of the event, and there will be information coming out to you, including the slides that were presented earlier on. And if there are any questions that have arisen in the chat that require an answer, well, we'll do our best to make sure that answer is provided to you. I've certainly found it really, really interesting. I hope you have too. Obviously, in putting this together, there's lots of people to thank, and certainly from my point of view, a big thanks to to Pat and to Debbie. A huge thanks to Helen for her signing. Behind the scenes at SDS, lots of work went in from both the comms and marketing team, Emma Diamond and Keith Falconer, in particular, making sure everything went smoothly today, and their colleagues who were working behind the scenes, and also colleagues of Pat's and Debbie's from the research and evaluation team who were on hand to to help out as we went through today's event. So only leaves me to thank you all again for attending, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks very much.